Hi everyone! Welcome to this week's Great River Rapport workshop. We are here at Rotary Creek and we are going to be showing you, have you ever wondered how scientists catch and identify small fish in minnows? So we have the boat ready to go for today with some volunteer helpers. And we are actually going to be going out and setting a gill net, so showing how to set a gill net. And then we're also going to be retrieving 2 gill nets, which we've already installed, to see if we found anything and identifying those fish. And if we have time, we may also come back and seine for some fish. So we're going to be showing you all of that today during our workshop. So let's get started. So anyone who is protecting science at the River Institute knows that this is a very essential measure to follow. Do you want to maybe show the live well?
Sure.
Yeah, so this right here is our live well. You can take a peek inside. It basically is kind of like a big cooler. And what it does is we fill it with some fresh river water, and so that way if we're measuring or tagging or anything the fish that we catch, and we're keeping them on board for that sort of purpose, then we can pop them in the live well. That way they're still getting some fresh cool water, lots of good oxygen in there. We don't want to keep the fish out of water for too long. So we're going to fill this up with water in the hopes that we've caught some good stuff. The area that we're setting just outside of Lamb Park right now, right by the Rotary is a place that we've been setting for our school program. So we've been doing a similar program to this with a lot of our students to come out and set both gill nets. And we've been having some success in this area. We think maybe because there's a little dam there and the water's getting turned up and introducing a lot of oxygen. So we think maybe that's why the fish are keen. There's lots of plants and stuff also. So we're really hoping, that we'll get a few larger things. We've been catching stuff like bass in this area, so we'll see if we have any luck today. We're going to keep our fingers crossed. I set my good luck orange net, so I'm hoping that there's some fish in there. So you can see as we pull up this way, there's a few buoys in the water, the orange buoys, and each of our nets is marked by 2 buoys. So we're going to pull around. There's one net right here and one net over there. I think we're gonna set first, right? So this is our net that we're going to set. Just like the other nets, it's got 2 orange buoys and 2 bricks on it. You can see there's one of our bricks there. The brick is attached to a lead line, a weighted line, and the buoys are attached to a float line. It's going to float on the top. And so Steph and Emma here are going to set our gill nets. We're going to toss the brick off first whenever Brian gives us the okay. The boat's in reverse right now. We toss the first brick and the buoy off. Get a nice little splash of water on the hot day today, and then the net starts feeding out into the water as we go along. And what Steph and Emma are doing right now is making sure that the net doesn't tangle in itself as it's coming out of the bucket. That can often happen if there are cracks in the bucket. There's also some screws and hooks and that sort of thing on the front of the boat, so sometimes the net gets tangled in there. And then as we got to the end of the net, Steph held onto the brick for a little bit longer to make sure that the net is stretched properly, because we don't want the net to kind of pull in on itself. It can get a little hard if the fish get in there. They get more tangled if the net's pulled in on itself, so we make sure to give it a good stretch with that brick, and then we toss the last brick and the buoy in, and you can see now these 2 buoys are marking the net that we just set. So we're going to pull the other 2 nets that we have. They're both a larger mesh size. So once we pull it in, I can show you guys up close what that mesh size looks like. And the different sizes of mesh we use to catch different sizes of fish. So today, with our gill nets, we're looking to catch a few bigger things, so we're using a bigger mesh size. But we also use some nets called experimental nets that on one side have that same big mesh, but on the other side have a little bit of a smaller mesh, and it changes size in a gradient as you go along. And we'll usually set those if we're looking to do a survey of community, so what different types of fish are there, because we're catching both the big things and the small things. And we'll usually set it with the smallest mesh closer to the shore and and we've got to pull them in. So usually one person is going to lean off the end of the boat. You'll see Steph as we get closer lean down, and we're pointing to the buoy so that she can see and that Brian knows where to go. And then as we pull up closer, she's going to lean down into the water and do her best to pull up the buoy. Sometimes we have a little bit of a tricky time. It depends who's pulling and it depends who's driving the boat. We don't always get it on the first try, so we'll have to see. There she goes, she got it. And sometimes the net gets stuck on something and we need another bin to pull it in. Is this the orange one? And so what Brian's doing right now is pulling up the motor. So we have to be really careful, especially when it's windy like today, that when we are blown around and the boat goes over the gill net, that the motor doesn't get caught in the net. And that's happened to us even recently. We had to cut our way out and we want to avoid cutting and damaging our equipment. So where the motor is up right now, the boat is off, and you'll see the girls are going to start pulling in the net. So we pulled in the buoy first, and then Steph pulled along that same line until she brings the first brick up, and both the brick and the buoy go into the bucket. And then one person each pulls one side of the net. So Steph has that lead line, that heavy line on her side right now. Emma has the float line, and there's a fish.
Keep the fish in the water.
So we lowered the net down.
Put the live well on after. As soon as I just hit the lock of the aerators.
Okay. So they've lowered the fish down into the water so that while we're trying to sort things out on the boat, that the fish isn't in the air, because even though fish do breathe oxygen, they use their gills to breathe oxygen, and they shouldn't be out of the water for too long. And the reason that this is called a gill net is because of how we're actually catching the fish in here. So the fish's gills are internal, but they have an external gill covering called the operculum. And when the fish swim into the net, they get caught in our mesh in the operculum. And you can see, if Zach wants to come up here, this is what we're talking about when we say mesh. So this is probably a 1.5 inch mesh. Am I close? 4-inch mesh. Is it 4? That seems really... Is it when you stretch it out like this? Oh, that's why. Okay, so it's when you stretch it out like this. That's 4 inches. I was thinking this way. And so the fish will swim right into here, and they'll get caught by the gills until we can pull them out. And so this is a bit of a skill. One that I think we're still always working on is trying to get the fish out of this mesh as quickly as possible. And it can be tricky because it's hard to tell sometimes which direction the fish swim into the net. And that's the most important thing to figure out when you're trying to get them out of the net. Nice.
I'll let you see him in a minute.
Okay, so we're going to keep pulling, see what else is there. Do we have any questions so far? And if you guys have any questions, please feel free, leave them in the chat. We'll do our best to answer them, or I'll do my best to answer them. And if I can't, then I'll pass along the question to somebody else on the crew. We're going to keep pulling and see if there's anything else we got. Another fish. Oh, nice. So once the fish are out of the net too, we can do a little quick ID test with you guys, see if you know what kind of fish that we've caught, and then let you know, if you don't know, what kind of fish that we've caught, and give you a little ID lesson. So you can see here, that's one of the fish scales. Now what's really cool about fish scales, it's just like tree rings. They actually have rings around them. They're not always like the most useful for aging a fish, but we can use them to take as an estimation. We have a question. What kind of fish was that? So we'll show you, after we pull the net all the way in, we're going to show you up close the fish, and we'll give you a little ID lesson. One more fish, and then we'll do some ID. So you can see that we usually do catch a lot of algae. Even if we don't catch a lot of fish, we're always catching a lot of algae. And then usually when we bring the nets back to the River Institute, we'll give them a good stretch out on the lawn, let them dry off, and try and remove as much of the algae as possible so that we're not setting a dirty net.
Alright, so that one I released because we've got 3 of the same. So I want to minimize the time to go to the water, so I'll talk about this fish first and then I'll show them to you quickly. So this is a red horse sucker. There are several different species of red horse suckers, and I think this is a silver red horse. I'm going to have to take some notes and confirm that back at the lab. So a lot of people confuse suckers and carp. A lot of people think they're the same. Carp is a fish that was brought over here by humans. It's an exotic species. It's now part of the ecosystem. Nobody's trying to get rid of them. In fact, a lot of people travel from long distances to fish carp. Carp are different from suckers though. Carp, despite their huge size, are actually in the minnow family. So a minnow isn't necessarily a small fish. Carp are in the minnow family, which is also sometimes called the carp family. So this is a sucker. It's a completely different family of fish. We have, I'd say, 3 or 4 species that we catch commonly in this area. White suckers and silver red horse suckers are the 2 most common. And they get their name from their mouths, the shape of their mouths. And I'm just going to show you this quickly, and then I'm going to let them go. Sure, someone grab the measuring board. So here's the sucker mouth that gives the sucker its name. And so these are native fish. They're not fish we should be trying to get rid of. A lot of people think because they confuse them with carp, there's something bad for the ecosystem. I'm not even sure we should be trying to get rid of carp anymore because they're here to stay, and lots of people like to fish for them. I just marked that spot, 501 or 2. So this is 500, a little over 500 millimeters, 50 centimeters. And it's moving away nicely. And this is another one, same, another red horse sucker. And I'm going to measure it quickly. Just mark that spot. So I try to make sure that they're not out of the water for more than a few seconds. I'm going to give you one last look. So the big scales on this fish tell me it's one of the red horse suckers. So there's 2 groups of suckers. There's the white sucker group, which have very fine scales relative to these red horses, and the red horse suckers have the big scales. And Lexi was, they also pop out really easily, so we can keep a scale to do some gauging. So if we had caught smallmouth bass, we would have done some different things. We would have tag these fish. We actually tag fish with the same kind of tagging gun. If any of you work in retail and put price tags on clothing with those plastic T-bar anchors, that's basically what we tag fish with. Had we had a bass, I might have shown you that. Reason why I'm tagging bass but not suckers is bass often get caught at fishing tournaments, and they get returned to the water quite far away from where they were actually captured, because they're usually captured all over the area, and then they get released close to the weighing station. And so I'm always interested in bass to see how far they move, and when, especially when when there's a fishing tournament going on, I like to have tagged fish in the water so anglers can catch them in one place, have them released in another, and then I get to see over time where they show up. So far it seems like at least some bass travel quite far to go back to where they're from. I had a fish that was caught quite far east of here, Somerstown area, that was captured in a fishing tournament and released probably not too far from where we are here in Lamera Park, and a few days later it was caught by an angler right back where it was from. So at least some bass seem to have the ability to find their way home, which is good news. Now that's a sample size of only 1 or 2 fish. We'd like to see that happen more often to be convinced that they're all making their way home. Sometimes we euthanize the fish and keep them for mercury research. That's not something we're doing on this trip. We help the ministries of the provincial regulatory ministries with understanding mercury patterns in fish, which then gets used to tell people how much fish they can safely eat.
We have a question, Brian. Sarah Greenwood wants to know how can we easily tell the difference between a sucker and a carp?
The shape of the mouth. So carp don't actually have those sucker mouths. They have fairly thick lips compared to some minnows, but they don't have that bottom-facing sucker-shaped lips with the really thick lips. And it's actually the shape of the lips that we use to confirm, at least that's one of the features we use. We use the shape of the lips to distinguish different species. And I don't know how well that sucker lip came across on the over the internet or Facebook, but if you Google suckers, you'll see the lips I'm talking about. There's also in some places really interesting interactions between those suckers and other fish. Suckers feed by sucking up a bunch of sediment and then retaining food particles and spitting out the rest through their gills and mouths, and that actually has the effect of vacuum cleaning the rock substratum at the bottom of the river and removing silt that starts to build up, and then it makes it fresh and clean for any fish that need clean silt-free rock. So silt is always covering rocks, and these suckers are always cleaning rocks, and there are some species of fish that actually rely on that cleaning service to provide good spawning habitat for them. All right, want to pull the other one?
Yeah.
All right.
I
think we can pull like even the one we produced set.
So we drifted away a little bit. You guys might not even be able to see the buoys anymore from where we are. But that's what happens when we turn the boat off and let it drift for a little while.
Work on the bottom deck so it doesn't fall on anybody's toes.
And then we're gonna take it back. We're gonna pull the other net. Hopefully we catch something a little different. Can we put this?
While we're driving over there, I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you tell the age of this fish by looking at the scale?
Yeah, so it's not quite as straightforward and simple as counting tree rings, but it's the same principle. You count the number of alternating areas where the rings are close and far apart.
Okay.
So when it's cold, fish grow really slowly and the rings are close together.
Okay.
And when it's warm, they getting good accuracy, but if you practice a lot, you can get quite good at figuring out ages from testing scales. Some fish have things in other body parts, but often those are body parts that can only be used if you have a dead fish. And because I'm a behavioral ecologist, most of my work involves tagging and studying fish movements and fish behavior. So I try to use scales, even though they're sometimes harder than some of the other hard body parts. You can use fin rays, you can section. Scales are nice and easy. Oh, speaking of scale, yeah.
All right, so when we pull the net in, we usually get a pretty good workout, partly because the brick is on the bottom, and partly because the net is often caught in the current. And so the current pulls, the fish in the net pull, all the extra algae pulls. So I always like to call this our scientist workout. This is how I usually get my workout in for the day.
At the start of summer.
Yeah, when it's been a little while and we're not so used to lugging these bins around, they get a little heavy, and by the end of the summer we're usually much improved. So this is my good luck net, so I'm going to be disappointed if we didn't get any fish in here. Caught? Do you want me to lean down and pull it out? It looks caught.
This one and the next one will be good.
You're gonna be disappointed.
There goes my good luck net.
It's for another workshop.
How long have the nets? So we have a question. How long have the nets been out?
So we set the first nets around, what did we say, 3 o'clock? So we set between 2:30 and 3 o'clock. We set those first 2 nets. We usually try and leave them in. It depends on which nets we set, and it depends on what we're trying for. But usually a couple of hours is ideally for us to leave the nets, especially if we're trying to catch something specific. So one of my coworkers is often looking for bass. So we try and set the nets for as long as possible to try and catch some bass. If we're setting the nets with the smaller mesh size, and that smaller mesh is close to shore, we try and set them for less time, because often we'll catch a lot of perch in there. I personally find perch one of the most difficult fish to get out of these nets, and it's mostly because they've got a really spiny top front fin, and you've got to kind of try and hold that down so it's not stabbing you with its fin while you're also trying to take the fish out of the net. It gets a little hectic sometimes with those guys, so our experimental nets are ones with the small mesh. We try and set them for a little bit less time so that we don't have to deal with as many perch. Alright, and we're going to pull our last gill net here. Do you want to pass me the black bucket from the back there?
Got it?
I have another question for you, Brian. Do you typically set the nets do you typically set the nets facing like east to west or down current?
I do both. It depends which way I'm expecting fish to be moving. So if I'm setting them at a time of day where I think they might be coming into shallow water to feed in the evening, I might set them parallel. Other times I set them perpendicular. But it's that's always something I record. So in my notebook, I record how long nets have been out, because all of this data goes to the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, and adds to their information, because it's a big province. So the provincial ministries only really get down to this part of the river every couple of years, and even then it's only for a few weeks. And that provides a really long-term data set, very valuable. We provide a much more intensive set of sampling from one particular area. So those data sets, theirs and ours, are complementary. So all of this data gets used to monitor the health of fish populations.
Alright, so we didn't catch anything else in that net.
We were not expecting.
No, because we didn't set it for very long. So that's why we would try and set it for a couple of hours usually, because then we're more likely to catch some stuff. We're getting close to our 4:30 mark, and it looks like maybe a storm is rolling in. So we're not going to do any seining for today. But if anybody has any last questions before we go, please let us know so we can answer them. And you can also leave comments in the chat, or send any extra comments or questions that you have on Facebook, or send us an email, and we can also answer any questions you might have that way.
Do you want to explain what is seining?
We can. So yeah, it's coming in really quick. So if we were to do a seine, it's a little bit of a different type of net. It's a black fish that looks a little bit more like the smaller net that we have on the boat. But the seine nets are also like the gill nets, a pretty long net. But we would use those by hand. So we would go in the creek, and we would have a person on each end of the net, and we would scare the fish into the net. So you kind of run down the creek, and then you close the net up like a big bag, like a purse, and you pull in all the bottom and the top of the net, form a little bag, and then pull it up to see what you might have caught. We usually use that to catch smaller things and survey either along the shore where we come off, or in the creek where we come off, because again, we're using those ones by hand. We're usually right in the water. On really hot days like today, we don't wear any extra gear. We're just in our water shoes, our pants, our shorts. Sometimes on cooler days, we'll wear things called waders, hip waders that come up to here, and they keep us all dry.
Just grab all the stuff. We're just going to load the gear back up.
Perfect. You want to jump out and close it?
Yeah. So if we don't have any more questions, we're just loading up to head back to the storm pits, and I just want to say thank you to everybody who joined us today. When's our next workshop?
It will be on July 14th with Marianne
Okay.
on Ever Wonder How Scientists Catch and Identify Dragonflies.
Beautiful. Okay, so July 14th, we will see you then. Have a great weekend, everybody.